I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is mostly cold and frozen throughout the United States. Certainly the case where both Dennis and I are, but a long regular season has finally come to an end. Some of these coaching tenures have come to an end. We're going to cover all of Week 18 action and the coaching changes that followed some of these games going forward. But Dennis, how are you staying warm there?
I'm not. I'm trying to stay inside. It's luckily I don't have to be out working the streets and anything like that. So the kids have been, even Ohio State was off yesterday, Cole was off class today, so no ball practice tonight. Feel like it was kind of they shouldn't have been off. If, like I was telling you, if they applied the same criteria to snow days when I was a kid, I'd still be in school.
Yeah, we did not have school today here either. It's pretty cold. It's been actually snowing pretty good all day and icing up the roads. I know my wife's school was open. She did not enjoy the commute on the way there. I can't wait to see how it goes on the way home. But there are some other people that are probably sitting in their house, staring off into the weather, trying to figure out what to do next. And that's because their seasons have come to an end. We saw the final week of the regular season on Saturday and Sunday. We're going to dive into the games and look at a few of the teams, not as many as we thought, but a few teams who did make some additional coaching changes. First games were on Saturday. Baltimore Ravens winning 35-10 over the Cleveland Browns. Ravens locked up the number 3 seed, but they may have lost Zay Flowers. How concerning is that going into the playoffs?
So it looks like he's going to be out at least the first playoff game. Hopefully he can bounce back. But on the plus side, Rashad Bateman has really stepped up this year and he's had a breakout season. If Flowers is out, I think that means they'll use more Isaiah Likely, and Rashad Bateman will be the guy again. They've got a pretty good offense, with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. And while Zay Flowers provides a certain, skill set with his quickness, Rashad Bateman has figured out a way to be a deep threat as well. They still have Nelson Aguilar. They've got, some depth guys that'll have to step up. But they're not opposed to throwing the ball to Justice Hill 7 or 8 times and letting Derrick Henry pound the ball, 35 times. It's going to be an interesting game. I think it's going to, while losing Flowers hurts because he's a good player, I think they have decent enough depth that it's not going to be a huge deal.
Meanwhile, the Browns locking up the number 2 overall pick. They are bringing back their coach and pretty much their whole group. Deshaun Watson is set to be back. Latest rumor is that he's had a setback in recovering from his Achilles injury. Apparently too much TikToking and world traveling for him there. But what do you think the Browns' biggest focus should be on this offseason?
Well, trying to convince Deshaun Watson to retire is what they need to do.
Yeah,
there's a meme going around with where Tony Soprano's like over him going, look, you had a setback, like threatening him to say he had a setback. They pick second, and it feels like they should take a quarterback there, whether it's Sanders or whether it's Ward. That feels like the upper tier of quarterbacks. I just don't like the idea of waiting and taking, Quinn Ewers in the second round, or maybe trading up from the second round to get Jalen Milroe. I think if you're going to take a quarterback this year, you take one of those two at the number 2 pick, either whichever one's left, or if somebody gets squirrely at 1 and takes Hunter, you take you take whichever one you prefer. It's interesting because as bad as the Browns played, there's no issue about Stefanski and Barry getting fired. I think Jimmy Haslam's sitting there going, yeah, the Watson thing was my idea, so you guys are okay. We're going to have to figure this out. We're a team, guys. Let's figure this out.
The other game on Saturday saw the Cincinnati Bengals hold off the Pittsburgh Steelers 19-17. Bengals finished 9-8. They had a shot at a playoff berth going into Sunday, but that got ended with a Broncos victory. The Bengals have subsequently fired Lou Anarumo. That defense obviously struggled quite a bit this offseason, but they also have big questions about contracts for Jamar Chase, who's going into his 5th-year option, and T. Higgins, who's going into being an unrestricted free agent again. Obviously, Jermaine Burton, not a big hit, was a healthy scratch that did not travel with the team in Week 18, which is not a great sign. What do you think is the biggest question for the Bengals this offseason?
They have to figure out what they want to do at wide receiver too. We know Joe Burrow wants him to bring Higgins back. I just don't think it's financially viable for the cheapest team in the league to pay Burrow and Chase and Higgins. They can, but they may not have 11 defensive players to put out there. Their defense needs work. Was jettisoning Anarumo the answer? No, it feels like he was scapegoated. They have Trey Hendrickson had a monster year. They just need more talent on defense. But unfortunately, we're looking at the Peyton Manning Indianapolis model. We're going to spend a shit ton of money on high-end offensive players and just hope we can draft and develop some defensive guys, and then keep recycling that process with draft and develop, and hope we can just keep that defense good enough to make a run. They need another offensive lineman, another stud there. It seems like they should be able to, and probably should want to, re-sign Mike Gesicki. He seemed to fit really well in that offense. Yeah, he's not a terrific blocker. You got other guys that can do that, but he can step up and be your third receiver, and even your second from time to time. It almost feels like he replaced Tyler Boyd, but he did it from the tight end position.
Meanwhile, one of the least auspicious performances for a marquee receiver was George Pickens. He had 6 targets, caught 1 pass for 0 yards, had 3 incredibly huge drops in crunch time for the Steelers. What is going on with him?
He's just a funky dude, and the Steelers have struggled some. So for me, I just think he needs to be involved early. He needs to mature. They need somebody to help take the pressure off him. When Warren and Najee Harris are getting it done, it does open up things for George Pickens. But in a nutshell, he needs some better quarterbacking. You know, if you can't be close to the target with Pickens, he'll make some fantastic catches.
He had 3 beautiful passes that were right to him that
he did
put on the ground.
He had some concentration issues, and you knew that coming in with him. It's part of why he fell. There were some personality quirks you get with George Pickens, but he's a pretty good receiver. You just gotta. I think the team needs to be better around him.
I'm not sure he is a pretty good receiver. One of the more exciting games of Sunday was Carolina Panthers ending the Falcons season 44-38 with a victory. The Panthers finished 5-12, but it was a really frisky 5-12. And I thought Bryce Young got a lot better once he came back from being benched. Is there reason for optimism, you think, in Carolina?
I think so. Bryce had some moments after he came back. He needs to improve a lot of parts of his game, still under 60% completion rate. With the Panthers picking at the 108, they're looking at one of the top two offensive linemen or one of the top interior defensive linemen. I think they can use help at either of those positions. It feels to me like this is a team that needs to continue to improve the not fancy positions. They need to get the nuts and bolts of it down, protect Bryce Young better, make sure he's a pretty good thrower of the ball. Maybe not the biggest arm, but he's like a skinny Kyler Murray without that much mobility. He's mobile. He had some rushing touchdowns. Let's get him a top-notch offensive line. Let's let Leggett and Coker develop. See if we can squeeze another year out of Adam Thielen and David Moore. Chuba Hubbard's there. Miles Sanders came back. It usually takes Sanders 2 or 3 years with a team before he starts playing well. We're getting there with him. We'll see if Jonathan Brooks comes back at all, but they've got Blackshear, Jatavion Sanders, and Tommy Tremble at tight end. So they have some of those things. They need defense. They need another offensive lineman to kind of beef it up and protect Young.
Meanwhile, I know you were getting excited on Sunday seeing some of this Atlanta offense. Michael Penix Jr. going for more than 300 yards. We saw 172 touchdowns for Bijan, 10 big receptions for Drake London. Still not much out of Kyle Pitts. But is this a promising sign for what the Atlanta offense could be in 2025?
No, I think there are elements of it. Penix makes some really nice throws. He still gets off a little bit here and there. Bijan looked fantastic. I'm not sure that Drake London's going to get a 47% target share every week. That was a kind of huge day. But if they're going to let Penix throw the ball that much, other people are going to get involved, whether it's Mooney, whether it's Pitts, whether it's Ray McLeod, whoever it is in those ancillary roles next year. I like the prospect of Michael Penix. I think it means we're going to see Kirk Cousins on the open market or at least be available. So it's sort of if you're a Falcons fan, you want to see Penix play well and you want to see that defense continue to step up. Giving up 44 points to the Panthers wasn't really stepping up. So they do need some help on defense in Atlanta.
The Washington Commanders faced the Dallas Cowboys, got the 23-19 victory, locked up the number 6 seed for the Commanders, who will travel to play the Buccaneers on Sunday Night Football. How do you feel about this young Commanders team as a contender in this playoff field?
I think they're going to go as far as Jaden Daniels can carry him. He's having some really good games. Has a fantastic connection with Olamide Zaccheaus. You thought I was going to say Terry McLaurin, didn't you? No, he's got a great connection with McLaurin. Zach Ertz is playing really well. I think they need some consistency out of the running game that they're not getting from Brian Robinson and Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols. Eckler just got activated, didn't he? Is he back for the playoffs?
He played on Sunday. I agree with you about the running game. Brian Robinson did not finish the month of December very well. So that would be my concern.
We've seen in his short career, though, we've seen Daniels load that team up on his back and carry him a little bit. I don't think he'll be able to do it deep into the playoffs, but it wouldn't surprise me if they get at least one win.
Meanwhile, we did get to see Trey Lance, 20 of 34, 244 yards, no TDs, but no INTs, 6 carries for 26 yards. I was not that impressed. Were you?
Depends on what your expectations were. He looked better than what I remember, but he started 5 games in 4 years. So unfortunately, he didn't get a lot of opportunity in San Francisco because of injury and just being outplayed. He went to Dallas where he wasn't going to get much playing time behind Dak. It doesn't feel like he's had a consistent opportunity to learn and develop and get real reps. And so I just don't know if it feels like we're never going to see that out of him. Is he as good as Malik Willis? Great question. We don't know because nobody will play him.
It feels like Dallas only played him on Sunday. It turns out because Cooper Rush was nearing some kind of bonus.
And that's dirty. If I'm Micah Parsons or Dak Prescott or any of those, Trayvon Diggs, I'm coming out and going, dude, what the actual, you can't. Cooper Rush stepped in there and bailed them out and played his ass off. Yeah, they weren't good, but he worked hard, was a team player, and to dog him like that, they should pay him that anyways.
Next up, the Chicago Bears went to Green Bay and got the 24-22 victory for the Bears. They wrap up 5-12. This win snapped a 10-game losing streak, was their first road win of the year, their first division win, and their first win over the Packers in quite a while. How big was this win for the Bears?
Well, you always want to go into the offseason with momentum, and losing 10 straight games, you'll take whatever you can get. And so this does give them some momentum. However, they need a coach. And without a head coach to kind of steer the ship now, it's like, what does this momentum really mean? We've seen the offensive line struggle at the beginning of the year. Then it got healthy and started to play well. Then it fell apart again. Tevin Jenkins was a highly regarded draft pick coming out. He's only played in 38 of 68 games since he was drafted. It feels like he's going to be gone. They're going to need to invest in some offensive line help. I think we saw growth out of Caleb Williams, but we saw him be the George Pickens of quarterbacks several times throughout the year as well. So I'm interested to see who the new head coach is, who the new offensive coordinator is going to be. They've got great receiving weapons. DeAndre Swift had a great year. The defense played all right. It's a team that has some talent. We'll just have to see what the head coach can get out of them.
Meanwhile, it was an especially big blow for the Packers. Their loss drops them to the 7th seed, so they have to travel to play the Eagles, which is not what anyone was looking for. Christian Watson tore his ACL, is done for the year. Jordan Love was forced from the game with a hand injury. Matt LaFleur says he thinks he'll be okay, but will be limited in practice this week. What all does this mean for the Packers as they go into the playoffs?
Well, I think they can absorb the Watson loss. He tore his ACL, didn't he? It ended up being a pretty big injury.
Yeah.
I think they can absorb that. We've seen Dontavian Wicks and Bo Melton, their wide receiver 4, and wide receiver 5, and even Malik Heath, their wide receiver 6, make plays. So you've got Dobbs and Reed, and Wicks will be their starting 3. Tucker Kraft has had a pretty good year, tight end. He's been real good. The question is going to be, is Love's hand okay? If he has any issues with that hand, it could be very challenging. They do have Josh Jacobs, though, and we know he's a grinder. Jacobs will carry the ball 30 times for 80 yards if that's what you need out of him. He's a big pounding back. He's got some explosiveness and some moves. So maybe he can be good enough to, even with a dinged up hand, Love can get the ball downfield to those receivers to make plays.
Next up, the Houston Texans battled the Tennessee Titans, got a 23-14 victory. It locked up the number 1 overall pick for the Titans. They fired their GM, Rand Carthon, but they are keeping Brian Callahan as head coach. They're at number 1. Clearly, Will Levis did not work out this year. Do you think they take a quarterback at number 1 in the draft?
Well, to start with the coaching / GM situation, there are several tweets out there. It seems like John Robinson had a power struggle with Mike Vrabel and lost. Then they brought in Rand Carthon, who had a power struggle with Mike Vrabel and won. Then they brought in Brian Callahan, who had a power struggle with Rand Carthon, and Callahan won. They're going to bring in a new GM. Does that mean Callahan's gone next year? And that's what the trend looks like. It seems like the front office there is a hot mess. Yeah, I think they have to take a quarterback. You're sitting at 1. Again, though, they could get squirrely. I don't think Mason Rudolph or Will Levis showed that they were worthy of being a starting quarterback in the NFL. I think actually right now, Will Levis aspires to be Mason Rudolph, which is somebody who's considered a, top tier, second tier backup that you hope doesn't have to play. But if you got to put him in there for 2 or 3 games, you feel like you could get by with him. I think that's the goal Will Levis has in his sights right now. I think they've got to. There's a lot of talk going out there that the Raiders should do everything they can to get Shadir Sanders and then sign Deion Sanders, as their head coach. I just don't think they have what it takes to get there without putting the team in such a bad position that they can't do anything. So I think Tennessee sits at 1. I think they take probably Sanders, maybe Ward, but it feels like Sanders and Ward are going 1 and 2, and it's pretty clear to most everybody.
Meanwhile, you had mentioned you were curious to see if we get to see Dameon Pierce get some run and see if he had picked up anything. 19 carries, 176 yards, and a touchdown. Did it make you feel better about Pierce?
Man, that touchdown was something, was it? Like 92 yards?
92 yards, yeah.
Man, I wasn't sure the big fella had the speed for that. It sure looked like he figured out the zone blocking. Like they've been drilling him. And, talking to Joe Mixon certainly unlocked something. He looks like he's a priority backup right now. He's a handcuff. I don't think they get rid of Mixon. Mixon does only have $8 million in dead cap, so it wouldn't be untenable for them to move on from Mixon. But they've got 1 more year of Dameon Pierce signed as a really cheap backup. If they try to do something with Pierce, going into next year, sign him to an extension, they can get rid of Mixon after 2025 for just $2 million. But if Pierce can continue to play well in a backup role, he could set himself up for, I wouldn't say a giant payday in 2025, but he could, or 2026, but he could set himself up for a pretty, one of those, 3-year, $18 million type of contracts.
At least he's made himself relevant again, which is good.
He did.
The other battle in the AFC South saw the Indianapolis Colts edge the Jacksonville Jaguars 26-23 in overtime. No surprise, the Jaguars moved on from Doug Peterson on Monday. What do you think they need to do this offseason?
I think they need to move on from Trent Baalke as well.
No, they've decided not to do that.
They did, but it was weird because they were on this Zoom call, and apparently somebody asked Shad Khan, well, what if are you willing to move on from Baalke if the coach, says, hey, I don't want to work with this guy? And Khan basically said, if they make a strong enough case, sure. But it's like, vote of confidence. You know, I guess on the plus side of things, Khan didn't come out and say, well, no, I'm giving him my vote of confidence, because that's a sure sign of death right there. So no, they need somebody that can come in and put some cohesiveness to that offense and get Trevor Lawrence where he needs to be. You know, he started out with Urban Meyer. Doug Peterson, it was thought was going to be the QB whisperer for him. It just didn't happen. Lots of injuries, both to him and his offensive weapons and the offensive line. The defense hasn't played great. It's been kind of a hot mess in Jacksonville for the entirety of Trevor Lawrence's tenure. I'd like to see him get a coach that he deserves, whether it's an offensive coordinator that can put him in good positions. I mean, if somebody can come in, by somebody, I mean Dave Canales, can come in and remake Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, somebody's got to be able to come in there and take a quarterback with Trevor Lawrence's seeming talent and make it work for him.
I mean, I think it's getting to be a fair question. How good is he? You know, there was a lot of talk that he was a generational talent coming in. Urban Meyer, as his head coach, did him no favors. He seemed to turn it around a little bit in year 2, but last year was kind of inconsistent, and this year they were good. So,
well, they get, you know, Lawrence will be back healthy next year. They'll get Christian Kirk back, Evan Ingram back. You know, hopefully maybe Travis Etienne comes back.
They already picked up the 5th-year option, so he is.
Well, I know, but maybe he actually comes back and plays well.
Good luck with that. Meanwhile, for the Colts, Anthony Richardson did not play because of back injury. In his post-game press conference, he said he would be happy if they brought in quarterback competition this offseason because he feels like competition would be good for him. We had hopes that coming off of a rookie year where he missed due to injury, we'd see kind of the explosion of promise we saw in a couple of games in his rookie year. Did not really play out that way. How are you feeling about Anthony Richardson now, looking at year 3?
So there's a conundrum with Richardson, and that is lots and lots of raw talent, like super raw. And the only way to refine that is with repetition. And he just keeps getting injured. He's played 15 games in 2 seasons. He's completing just barely over 50% for his career. When you know, the skeleton of Joe Flacco can come in and light it up with those receivers. I mean, Richardson has to be able to absorb that. I don't know if he's not putting in the work mentally. I've heard nothing. I know nothing. So I'm not calling him out. But the evolution of him into a competent NFL quarterback has to speed up, because you can't just keep bringing in competition every year and then playing that competition when it's an ancient Joe Flacco, or who's next? Mason Rudolph, you know, is Matt Ryan coming back out of retirement? I don't know. I want him to do well because of Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce and Josh Downs and Jonathan Taylor, and the fact that I traded at least 2 101s to 102s because I didn't feel my team was at a point where I needed Bijan. And Richardson's not panning out so far in those deals.
Next up, the New England Patriots get a 23-16 win over the Buffalo Bills. When a win is not good for you. But let's talk about the Bills first. They are the number 2 seed in the AFC. They really, Josh Allen played one play just to keep that starting streak intact. I think the only real question for the Bills is, can they beat the Chiefs? We know we beat them. They beat them in the regular season here, but that's been the case the last couple of years. How do you feel about them going into the playoffs?
You know, they've got to go to Kansas City. You know, if it's cold, it shouldn't affect the Bills. They're used to playing the Bills, or playing in the cold, excuse me. It's a great matchup. And can they beat the Bills? I don't think there's any question they can, but will they? It feels like it's going to come down to, can McDermott match Andy Reid when it comes to calling the offense and defensive plays. Joe Brady's getting a lot of requests for head coaching jobs. We've seen it in the past when a quarterback makes a coordinator. Yes, that's you, Adam Gase. I don't know if Josh Allen's making Joe Brady or not, but I think that it's going to be a good game. I'm not sure if they end up matching up how I would rank it, which side I would go. For me right now, it's hard to bet against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Meanwhile, for the Patriots, it was the second week in a row a team won when maybe they shouldn't have and lost the number 1 overall pick. Patriots slide to pick number 4. They also made the decision in the immediate aftermath on Sunday to let go of Gerard Mayo after only 1 year as head coach. A lot of persistent rumors out there that this is because they have their eyes locked onto Mike Vrabel. Do you think that would be a good move if it happens?
I think Vrabel is a really good head coach. He seems to be the top dog in this coaching cycle right now. He seems also to be the best prepared to be that CEO type that, lets his offensive and defensive coordinators run their shows. I think people want to work for him. Players want to play for him. Looking back, I think you could say that Tennessee probably made the wrong choice when they let Vrabel go. But who knows? He could land a job and go and stink up the joint. I know the Jets seem to be interested. The Raiders are interested. Jacksonville, Chicago, everybody wants to sit down and have a talk with Mike Vrabel, and I think rightfully so. He's a really good head coach.
Yeah, and I do think he will end up in New England. Be curious to see what they do there. At least they actually have a quarterback. The New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles clash. The Eagles getting a 20-13 victory despite sitting most of their important players. For the Giants, they are now the number 3 overall pick, which might actually be the worst position to be in this draft if you need a quarterback, which they do. Can they get a quarterback this offseason? They've decided to keep Brian Dable and Joe Shane, but it seems like the leash is pretty thin there.
Well, Joe Shane needs to pull a Joe versus the volcano and go up and sacrifice something to make somebody want Travis Hunter so bad that they'll jump ahead of the other 2 teams. They need a quarterback in the worst way. They're probably going to have to go veteran, and they're probably going to have to go second-round quarterback. If I'm the Giants, given their needs, if both of those top 2 quarterbacks come off at 1 and 2, I'm looking to move back. Could we use Travis Hunter? Sure, we could use Travis Hunter, but we've got needs at so many positions, especially along the offensive line. If they can move back, assemble draft capital, and then go bring in a veteran and go and grab Ewers or Beck or maybe even Milroe, one of those second-tier quarterbacks in the second round, and see if they can develop them. Maybe they go get Kirk Cousins. Maybe they bring in, one of these other veteran quarterbacks that's going to be out there. Just don't make it Aaron Rodgers.
Meanwhile, for the Eagles, Tanner McKee getting the start didn't look too bad. Jalen Hurts still in the concussion protocol, in part because they haven't had practices this week, but Kenny Pickett also with broken ribs. How are we feeling about the quarterback situation in Philly as they move into the playoffs?
Well, I got to be honest. If I'm a Philly fan, I don't want Tanner McKee starting for me in the playoffs. That being said, you got Saquon Barkley, and he played serviceably well. McKee did. I think that McKee's it's his second year in the league, I think, and he's been in Philadelphia, so he knows the offense. He knows what they want to do. They've got one of the best offensive lines in the league. They've got a really, really good defense. So if they can keep it, if McKee has to start, they're going to need to keep it as a fairly low-scoring game so that they get, let's see, they've got the Packers. Maybe they'll get lucky. And they got Packers with Malik Willis. We can see the backup bowl.
Yeah, that would be exciting. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints, pretty strong final outing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the Buccaneers get the 27-19 victory. Still, a game the Buccaneers needed to win and were trying hard to win. The Saints actually holding a 16-6 lead at the half. Spencer Rattler looking a little bit better a couple weeks after getting blanked on Monday Night Football. Did this game make you feel any better about him as a prospect?
Rattler was always somebody that was going to need some development. So he's had a little bit of trial by fire because of injuries. I do think he's a better prospect than Jake Haener. But unfortunately for him, when it comes to development, there was a coaching change. He's been playing with a UFL caliber lineup. I don't think he earned the job by any stretch of the imagination, but he's gained some valuable experience. I don't expect to see Spencer Rattler as anybody's starting quarterback next year. But if him and Haener are still in New Orleans, I expect Rattler to be the number 2 and Haener to be the 3.
Meanwhile, the Buccaneers worked extra hard, making sure Mike Evans got the yards he needed to get over 1,000. He's done it for 11 consecutive seasons, tying Jerry Rice. How big was this moment for Mike Evans?
Well, I think if you were watching the game, you saw exactly how big it was. His teammates were thrilled. Everybody was so excited that he was able to get it. We can talk about it. Oh, it was cheap because it was everything was settled. Yada yada. That's great and fine and dandy. The reality is he missed 3 games. He averaged almost 72 yards per game. If he had played all 17 games, he'd have been comfortably over 1,200 yards this year. So the fact that he missed 3 games and was able to come back and still put up 1,000 yards for his 11th straight year to start his career, I think it's phenomenal.
Next up, the Kansas City Chiefs rested a lot of their players in Denver. The Broncos took advantage, 38-0 win, propelling Denver into the playoffs. Oh, they rested a lot of their starters on offense. Only a couple, I think, on defense. This creates a situation where, being the number 1 overall seed, it will have been 25 days between meaningful snaps for most of those players that rested. Do you think that verges on being too long a layoff?
So, it's a double-edged sword here. Yes, it feels like it's too long because it's easy to get rusty and just not be on top of your game when you do get back out there on the field and it counts. On the other side of that sword, at the other edge, man, that's 24, 25 days to get healthy, to make sure everybody is ready to go. And we see it all the time with Super Bowls, that it isn't always the best team in the league that wins. It's the healthiest good team that wins. And if Kansas City can use this time, much like Detroit, even though they started their players this week, but if they can use this time to get healthy, it could set them up to three-peat for the first time in NFL history.
Meanwhile, the Broncos make the playoffs. They will travel to Buffalo next week. Will definitely not be favorites in that game. But was this a good sign for them in the future moving forward? A nice 10-7 season here for Bo Nix as a rookie.
I think it was. I got to be honest. If the Chiefs were at full strength, I'd have picked the Chiefs over the Broncos. But
Denver really beat the Chiefs when they were at full strength in the middle of the season too. So
I know, but I still picked them. The the Broncos have been a pleasant surprise this year. Bo Nix has played really, really well. Cortland Sutton has had a phenomenal year. It'd be nice if they would just pick a running back and let that guy get in rhythm every single game. But they don't. The defense has some very, very good defensive backs, some good other good players. It's a situation where if I'm you as a Broncos fan, despite my hatred for Sean Payton, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they had a good season. I'll be curious to see how they fare against Buffalo in this playoff game. Some good pieces on defense. See what happens going forward. Another team that had a very pleasant year is the Los Angeles Chargers. Got the 34-20 win over the Raiders. That locked up the 5th seed for them, so they will get to go play the Houston Texans now, which had to have been a more optimal matchup than having to go to Baltimore. How do you feel about the Chargers as contenders here in the playoffs?
I think they've got a puncher's chance. I'm probably leaning Chargers over Texans right now, but I don't think I would be looking at the Chargers going beyond this wild card game. They're going against the Texans, who haven't been consistent, and so I think the Chargers getting J.K. Dobbins back gives a little pop to that running game. I don't know what Quentin Johnston, 180 yards or whatever it was. So maybe he figured out how not to drop the ball. Glad McConkey's playing great. There are a lot of pieces on that Chargers team that say to me, look, we can beat Houston in Houston.
Yeah, 13 for 186. Pretty impressive. Meanwhile, the Raiders fall to 4-13. They did not make a coaching move on Monday. That led many to speculate that Antonio Pierce was safe, but they ended up firing Antonio Pierce today. Are keeping GM Tom Telesco. Really have been unable to find that answer at quarterback in either of the last 2 seasons. Do you think that has to be a huge priority for them this offseason?
It does, but I just don't think they're not in a good range to be able to get one of the top quarterbacks. And I just what are they going to do? Trade Max Crosby so they can go up and draft a quarterback? That seems silly to me. Now, if they traded him to Detroit, I don't think it's quite as silly.
You're not going to get up for a top quarterback there.
I question the keeping Tom Telesco. I don't think that makes much sense either. But they picked too high to kind of be in the Jalen Milroe range. So if Milroe is going to be their guy, they're going to have to move back. If Shadur is going to be the guy, I don't know, maybe Dion tries to do an Archie / Eli Manning thing, and they force whatever team up there to trade him because he's not going to play for them. That seems like crap, but it's possible. If they're picking in the second round, they're picking in the Ewers, Beck, Jackson Dart range of quarterbacks. So do they need a quarterback? Yes. Are they in a good position to get one? No. So depending on who their coach is, they may need to bring in a veteran. They may need to, a veteran that's better than Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. I don't know how many of them are out there. Maybe they bring Jimmy Garoppolo back. Maybe they bring Carson Wentz over. Who knows? But they definitely need a quarterback. I know that there's a love affair with Shadur. It's going to take quite some machinations to make that happen.
The Seattle Seahawks ended the season with a 30-25 victory in LA over the Rams. They fired their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, after the season. I think there's been speculation about whether this is it for Geno Smith. Where do you think the Seahawks go on offense?
I don't have any idea. I thought Grubb ran a great offense at the University of Washington. I felt like he had the weapons to run a good offense in Seattle. I to be one and done with him, it feels like there's something behind the scenes that we don't know. Some friction with McDonald, some friction with position coaches, maybe friction with Geno Smith or DK Metcalf or whatnot. Who knows? It seems like if I am a team that's going to need an offensive coordinator, and if any of the several offensive coordinators out there interviewing for head coach jobs get one, Grubb would be right at the top of my list to bring in and talk to. So, who knows? Maybe Grubb is going to be my OC in Detroit next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Their offense ends up being kind of middle of the pack, 18th in points for, 14th in yardage. They were 8th in passing yardage, only 28th in rushing yardage. Maybe
a healthy Kenneth Walker would have helped that.
Can't control all the injuries. Meanwhile, Jimmy G gets his chance to shine here. 334 yards, 2 touchdowns to help keep the Rams, who had sat pretty much everyone of consequence on offense in this game. Did that spark any interest for you in Jimmy?
I think it did. If I'm a team that needs a veteran quarterback to come in and compete for a job, I think Garoppolo is as good of option as there is out there for the price you're going to pay to get him. So he does turn 34 next season. So you're not signing up for him to be your guy the next 3, 4, 5 years. But I do think he's a viable bridge quarterback. If you draft a Shadur Sanders, I don't know if maybe he plays for a couple years. If you bring in a Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers, and you go that route, maybe he's got a couple years. But unfortunately, he has a tendency to get injured. But I think he's a serviceable bridge quarterback.
Probably the most surprising / worst game of the afternoon window was the Jets getting a 32-20 win over Miami. The Dolphins are retaining their head coach and GM, but there are big questions swirling now around Tyreek Hill, who saw just 3 targets, 2 passes for 20 yards, refused to play in the fourth quarter of a game where the Dolphins were trying to come back and still had a shot at a playoff berth. Big meeting between the sides today. Supposedly he did not ask to be traded, although on Twitter he changed his profile pic to his head on.
Hit the mute button.
No, I'm still here. He put his head on
Antonio
Pierce's body. So what are you thinking about Tyreek Hill going forward? Can you hear me now?
Weird. All right, say something now.
So, what do you think happens with Tyreek Hill this offseason?
Still nothing. I don't know. I can't hear you.
All right. Not sure.
Let me exit and I'll come back in.
I think it'll be interesting, obviously, to see where things go with Tyreek Hill. Be curious to see if he ends up returning to Miami. I think personally, he was a player that I actually was thinking would be worth moving on from in Dynasty anyway. Have not liked the energy in Miami, but Dennis, now that you're back, what do you think the Dolphins do with Tyreek Hill? They say he didn't request a trade in the meeting today, but all of the other indications he's given have seemingly been that he's ready to go.
They say that winning cures a lot of ills, and unfortunately they didn't make the playoffs. They've been up and down. They've had trouble beating good teams, and whether he's kind of looked around and decided, I just don't think this team is going to get over the hump, and so I'm going to try to force my way out of it, or whether it was just, man, the season's ending and I'm super bummed, and I'm going to just bitch about it for a couple days. He could just be blowing off steam. He's had some injuries. He hasn't he's had to play with some questionable quarterbacks and over the last couple of years.
Tyler Huntley looked dreadful too.
And I think it's just one of those things where the heat of the moment I think caught up with him, and he, ran his mouth, and I think, things will cool down. Him and Waddle will be back with Achane. And maybe he just got tired of watching Devon Achane put up numbers all year.
Meanwhile, statistically, it hasn't been too bad of a season for Aaron Rodgers. That continued on Sunday, threw for 4 touchdowns, got his 500th career passing touchdown, but it been a bad energy. Jets finished 5-12. Is this it for him in New York? It for him in general?
Man, was that like the worst feeling? 500th touchdown ever. It was like, wow. No, I think he gets somebody to pay him. I think he feels like he's still got cachet. He's still got name recognition. He's able to, I think he'll be able to talk about what a shit show New York was. And, well, people want to say I did this and I did that, but I didn't. Do I share my opinions? Yes, but I think any high-level NFL player is going to share their opinions. Whether or not, they were responsible for making their own decisions. Somebody's going to look at him and be like, I think I can get a couple years out of him. Let's give it a shot. And dude loves money.
I mean, if you're the Jets, you got to hope he retires, because it's $49 million in dead cap to move on. And they would need a significant chunk even to trade. And I don't know what QB needy teams are really looking to take on that kind of a trade. It's a bad situation. I have to wait and see who ends up being the coach there. But personally, I thought Rodgers, from his discussion, seemed like he was leaning toward retiring. I think it doesn't seem like he's having fun anymore, and hasn't been having fun for 2 or 3 years, but we shall see this offseason.
Playing for the Jets will do that to you.
I mean, I thought that was the case his last year in Green Bay, too. He didn't seem like he wanted to be there. The Arizona Cardinals end the season with a 47-24 win over the 49ers. Deebo Samuel was not healthy enough to go in this one. What do you think happens to him this offseason? We've seen Ricky Pearsall step up. Jawan Jennings looking really good there. They have Brandon Ayuk that they just re-signed, and George Kittle. Deebo did not have a great season or much of a role even when he was on the field the last few games. Do you think he is a veteran that could be on the move this offseason?
Well, he has 31 million left on his contract, 31 million in dead cap if they let him go. He's got 1 year left on his contract. I mean, if I'm the Niners, I want to figure out how to move on from him, because I like what I saw from Pearsall. And the hard part is, like, yeah, Jawan Jennings is great and all that. Jennings is only 1 year younger than Deebo. And so you're looking at a guy who was, a 4th-year breakout in the NFL. So,
well, he's more of like a third or complementary receiver. I'm really thinking it's Ayuk and Pearsall that they'd run with.
Yeah, and so to me, it's from a team perspective, I just don't think there's enough ball to go around, and Deebo ends up getting the short shrift there when Ayuk is healthy and Kittle is healthy. CMC is supposed to be coming back. Let's see how that pans out. But if he does, Purdy's got another elbow injury. What's going to happen there? Will he kind of come back, or will he fade off and into the sunset? Of a cute story one time.
Another guy they have to pay this offseason. Meanwhile, for Arizona, they end the season 8-9, an improvement over last year, 6-3 at home. They have Murray, James Conner, Trey Benson, Trey McBride, and Marvin Harrison Jr. all under contract potentially to be back next year. What do you think they need to focus on this offseason?
I think they need to improve their offensive line, and they need to get playmakers on defense. They need somebody besides Buda Baker on that defense that can, and at this point, he's getting older and might just be living off his reputation. They need some difference makers on the defensive side of the ball, and they need offensive linemen that are going to give Murray enough time that he doesn't have to run. The chemistry between Murray and Marvin Harrison just did not seem to develop at any consistent level. And honestly, I think it's wild that Drew Petzing is getting head coaching interviews. I just don't think he's done anything in Arizona to warrant him being ready for that.
The probably best game of the on the schedule anyway.
Probably
was, well, I don't know if it ended up being the best game. I mean, I was happy with the outcome, but in terms of to overall competitiveness, was Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions. Lions get the 31-9 victory to lock up the number 1 overall seed. Vikings will go on the road to play the Los Angeles Rams this week. It was a tough night offensively, not a lot that Darnold or the running game was able to do. How are we feeling about the Vikings going into the playoffs?
I like the Vikings where they're at as the top wild card there. They have the edge over the Rams on just about every point, running offense, defense. The Rams defense gives up fewer yards on offense and are ranked a little bit higher. But they also give up a lot more what's that word? Sorry. A lot more pressure on the quarterback. So Stafford's not mobile, so if the Vikings are getting to Stafford, it's going to create some issues. I think it's going to be a very interesting student-teacher matchup between McVay and O'Connell. I just think that Brian Flores probably has the edge on defense, and O'Connell with Justin Jefferson. I think it's going to be a great matchup between the offenses. I just feel like the Vikings are the better team. So I'm looking it. I don't think it's going to be necessarily as big a spread as Detroit, Minnesota was this week, but I think the Vikings will beat the Rams fairly comfortably.
Meanwhile, it seems like few teams have needed that number 1 seed by more than the Lions. How big
was pride, baby.
How big was the win for them?
It was huge. Getting Alex Anzalone back was huge as well. We've still got a lot of holes on defense, and playing one fewer game, makes that path to the Super Bowl a little bit more manageable. The downside is you're theoretically playing the better teams as they get to you. But the Lions, we have to make timely plays on defense. And this week against the Vikings, Amik Robertson came up huge in the defensive backfield. We need time to get healthy. We need to be able to get some guys going. We still have lost a lot of players that aren't going to make it back for this playoff run. But our offense is powerful, and it looks like Monty's supposed to be back by that second round game as well. So that's definitely – well, I'm not concerned about the workload for Jahmyr Gibbs because we're in the playoffs and making a run. It would be nice to take some of the pressure off him and some of the beating off of him that they maybe don't trust Craig Reynolds or Jermar Jefferson for. But, man, Jahmyr Gibbs looked phenomenal.
Yeah, and it was a big game, a very convincing win, hopefully a good piece of momentum for the Lions as they move into the playoffs. That'll do it for us today. That's a wrap on week 18 of the regular season. We will be back on Friday previewing the 6 games in Super Wildcard Weekend. Should be a lot of fun. We'll see what other kind of news pops up if they have second thoughts on one or two of these coaches and GMs, as has been the case so far. But it's going to be a long week with not a lot of football, though there are college games, I believe, start again on Thursday night.
Thursday and Friday, yeah.
But if you are looking for something to fill the long, cold nights in between, what can the people do?
They can go to their favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. Give us a subscribe. Give us a like. Let's get those numbers up. Give us a late Christmas present. Subscribe.
Well, that'll do it for us today. Hope you guys stay safe this week. We will see you on Friday.